Can't do anything. And hopefully... Okay, brilliant. We're on the air. We're live. So I'm with the Young Centrist today for a nice chat, hopefully, about elections, democracy, America, the sort of state of the country at the moment. So hopefully I sound okay. The Young Centrist. Is there anything you'd like me to call you, actually? Do you want me to... Have you got a name that you'd prefer me to call you, or how?
I'm definitely the Young Centrist.
Young Centrist, awesome. Okay, then how are you today? All right?
Yeah, pretty good today. Yeah, I just woke up actually. Yeah.
I forget that it's a bit earlier in the day in California, but
yeah, it's definitely early.
Well, thank you for sort of picking a UK accommodated time.
You're welcome.
But yeah, like it says in the title, we're going to have a nice chat, hopefully, about democracy itself, about elections, about the sort of process which we probably take for granted a little bit, but it's something which I think needs a bit of scrutiny, because we're in an interesting point in time. When I say interesting, I mean precarious and quite dangerous, actually. The way our democracies are heading. Obviously, I'm in the UK, but America is the sort of the main focus really here. There's a lot of worry about the actual ability to participate in a functioning democracy. And so when I saw your video, and I thought to myself, there's a lot here which is quite interesting, but I'm curious as to your perspective on it. As you know, your title, your name, Young Centrist. Centrism, I imagine, is the sort of worldview that I'd be correct in ascribing to you.
I think so.
Okay, yeah. And so that's sort of what piques my curiosity a little bit, because when I look, as a British person looking at America and looking at the sort of Trump administration's general perspective on democracy, clearly, sort of for me, there's like a clear anti-democratic, authoritarian sentiment from this group. They clearly have no interest in managing the country with anyone but their own power in mind. So I'm curious as to sort of where, like, to me, when I hear the term centrism, I imagine something that almost meets in the middle, almost, or takes both sides. Or am I right in thinking it's something which sits between Democrat and Republican, or is it something different? Like, how would you describe it?
I kind of describe it as like learning to. This is coming from me. I was actually originally a Trump supporter back in 2016 to 2017 because I thought he would be a good man for the job, but throughout my years in college, my viewpoints actually shifted more left wing, because I started supporting things like a lot of electoral reform or reforms to America's electoral system, such as like ranked choice voting and proportional representation. But how I really define centrism is definitely seeing, understanding like where both sides are coming from, understanding where the right is coming from and the left, and just learning how to listen to other people is really the key to helping bring people back together.
Okay, so it's almost like a I don't want to say psychological, but like a case of sort of person to person thing rather than like a political almost. It's like literally being a bridge between people to try and find that middle ground. That's interesting, because I mean I have a different trajectory in that I was never sort of I've always been varying degrees of left wing, but like you, the electoral system was certainly something which has piqued my interest quite a bit. We have first past the post in the UK as well, where we're also struggling with the fact that our main two parties are not that popular anymore, and that there's a lot of sentiment.
I mean, I saw some like opinion polling in the United Kingdom. I know the most recent poll, I know Reform's actually up in Reform UK is actually up in the polling right now, to say the least, in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, but I mean, interestingly, it's interesting because we center so much on over Reform are first in the polls, but you look at their actual number and it's like some say they're as low as 24%, which is like, if you're winning not even a quarter of the popular vote and then expecting to have a majority of the seats in the House of Parliament, then there's clearly something a bit wrong with that democratic outlook, right? But from what I was saying there was more because like you, I think it's important to have conversations as well. But to me, there's an element of wanting to be critical of the sides that exist in the world at the moment, and especially the you said yourself, right? You have a more left wing perspective than you did, largely probably because you've seen some of the right wing consequences in action, right? Like the way Trump's gone and such. And so for me,
especially January, especially what happened on the events of January 6th and how he like refused to concede the 2020 election. I just couldn't. I really couldn't. It's how can you stand up for democracy when you can't even concede your own defeat back in the 2020 election? Because that's
exactly,
part of democracy. You have to concede if
exactly.
the people don't choose you.
Exactly, like the guy, clearly has no interest in participating in any sort of fair electoral process, and January 6th was probably a really good example of it, because he quite literally sent his supporters. Apparently my audio is much quieter than yours. Hold on a second. Let me. How do I? If I do that, I can hear myself on yours, but. Are you fine to turn your volume very slightly down, and hopefully that will
Let me see. Yeah, I can
adjust
try.
it? Yeah, no, nothing but the most professional standards on the Owen MacDonald channel. Ash, is that any better?
That I think that's better. Is that better?
I mean, I can't tell with my own headphones what the volumes are, but we'll see. But no, like, so January 6th is a really good example, isn't it? Because you've got people who actively not only tried to ignore the results, lied about what the Democrats were doing, sent their supporters to the Capitol building to actually try and instigate, the Republicans seizing power again. And then 4 years later, they get to be in another election, and the guy who was central to all of that is just there in the White House the next time, and now trampling all over American democracy. And so when you say meeting the sides, in my mind, the meeting would need to be something which is almost like Republicans acknowledging, yeah, things have been terrible under us. We need to change quite a bit of right wing sentiment and thought. And if they're not able to do that, it's almost like, well, what are we meeting? Like, there's an element of like, we can't compromise with fascists, because to compromise with them is to like pretend some of their talking points are something that would have some agreement on, when in reality we've seen what happens when these people gain political power, and there needs to be like a zero tolerance almost for well, not even almost, there needs to be zero tolerance for the stuff they've been doing for quite a bit of time now.
It comes to the idea like both sides need to be both committed to democracy. They need to both accept that they're not the exclusive voice in society, that there's other voices that also deserve to be heard in democracy, because everyone has like different viewpoints and different beliefs, and they also deserve to be heard, and they also deserve to have a chance to actually be able to govern themselves as well, with a party that can actually speak for themselves, which is exactly why, in my opinion, that the United States should be some type why I started the work to really why I believe the United States should be some type should be more of a multi-party democracy, not a two-party system, because I believe that can better represent the opinions of the American people, because Democrats and Republicans in all 50 states, they're completely different. There's some liberal Republicans in blue states. There's still some conservative Democrats like Joe Manchin, for instance, but he from West Virginia. But I think having a more multi-party system would help better represent the viewpoints of the American electorate.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Multi-party is definitely something which would be useful to aim for. I think we, in the UK, for instance, as we were sort of saying earlier, there's been that fragmentation of the popular vote, and the system will likely need to update itself to reflect that there's not really a party with that broad political support anymore. But to rewind very slightly to what we're saying about viewpoints, I think that you're quite right. Everyone has viewpoints, and it's important to discuss them and such. But there's clearly a difference between trying to work out what's the best way to spend a budget of a state or a council or whatever on any level, versus the stuff which is the viewpoint of the fascists that we're trying to sort of remove from political power, who believe that democracy isn't something worth bothering with, that when they meet the challenges of managing people, they just eliminate certain groups from having the vote. Um, as we discussed earlier, people who will actively send their supporters to try and instigate political violence upon the politicians trying to ratify the new incoming president and such. Like, I mean, that inevitably connects to our political ideologies and such, because the party which has done this, the Republican Party, has overwhelmingly embraced a far right trajectory, and the liberal Republicans that you talk about absolutely do exist. I completely agree. There's many Republicans who don't want this to be happening, but the nature of the political system, as we've sort of described, allows for the far right, in this case, to consolidate power and force those people to either keep voting for them or have no say in the party. There's no, the moderate Republicans that might have in 2016 spoke out against Trump have largely either subsided in popularity or viewpoints or whatever, or just not really done anything. And so, to sort of sum up what I'm saying, I think whilst I agree with the stuff you're saying largely, but there needs to be that ruthlessness, I think, which I suppose is the sort of crux of what we're discussing here. Really, like, is centrism really the approach that is going to have that ruthlessness to say, yeah, there are some fundamental issues with how how clearly the side which is in power right now is managing things, and in order for us to move forward, we've got to say, no, there can't be there are some things we cannot compromise on. You're going to have to move away from that.
I do think that there can be some things that we can't compromise on, like, but I also think like just reacting to them just on like responding in a way that also like reacts like responding but right back to like to undemocratic mechanism, like what, like for instance, like when Trump told the Texas Republicans to find me 5 more House seats to redraw like the district line to be more in favor of Republicans in Texas. California did the same thing with Prop 50 and how they redraw their district lines, and I feel like just responding with undemocratic mechanisms to undemocratic mechanisms, I feel like that's, in my opinion, goes against the really diminishes the democracy. But in some areas, I do see some of the benefits with engaging in partisan gerrymandering, because both sides are holding each other to account and then getting them to the negotiation table. But I don't think in the long run it's gonna hurt the American people, because if both parties engaging any form of gerrymandering, that's just gonna hurt the people overall, because they're gonna have less voice in our government.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like, gerrymandering shouldn't be the long-term solution to solving democratic problems. But I think the analysis that needs to sort of happen here is the reason the Democrats have gerrymandered is, as you've just said, in response to Trump literally saying, use this to, exactly, right? Like, I mean, it sounds juvenile saying they did it first, but in this case, it's literally the case, right? Like, the only reason they are using this obvious curbing of democracy is in response to this happening to try and win the Open Fascist Party more seats. And for as much as it's important to say, yeah, this isn't a good tool, we've got to sort of look beyond that a little bit and think, okay, what is the reason people are even having to use this in the first place? Like, that clearly one side not only used it in this election, but has been for some time now, and not just with gerrymandering, like with like voter ID laws and with the number of places you can actually literally go and place your vote, right? Like, there's some parts of the country where you have a minimal number of ballot stations for thousands of people, and you're having to wait hours and hours and such. And the fact that, yeah,
in every state has like different election laws as well, and
yeah,
and it makes it a lot very complex, and makes it very complex, in my opinion, and that's one of the reasons I think there needs to be some type of like uniform laws to actually, where every state follows the same rules in running elections.
Exactly. There's lots of things that can be done. So I can just hear myself echoing very slightly. I don't know if your volume is coming through your speakers or.
Oh, I'm probably using my speakers. That's why. I think
I
that's why.
see. Sorry.
Yeah.
Are you fine to
I'm
turn it
sorry
down
about
very
that.
slightly, just so that it's not being
Yeah, I
picked
can.
up by. Fantastic. That sounds a bit better. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
So yeah, no, it's interesting because like I think that yes, there should be a a better way of managing the actual election day itself, right? Like something which is a national. Um, okay, everyone's going to follow these rules and such, but again, American history is complicated, and so it's tricky to imagine the states being in a position where they'd all sort of follow the same thing. But more importantly, the issue really isn't strictly that there's not like a central body doing it. It's that, again, in Republican states, the people in charge actively make it harder for people that don't vote Republican to vote. And as crude as that sounds, it is ultimately the case that if you live in a red state and you don't vote red, they shut down voting stations, make the times to actual vote harder, pass ridiculous voter ID laws, you have to pay money to even get the ID, which obviously makes it a barrier to casting your democratic right.
And especially where in my area of California, I think you only have like I only have 2 DMV areas in my location. You have to travel long distances, and that can really hurt people who don't have access to transportation to get to the DMV. And plus, the DMV has really long waiting lines as well. You have to wait hours upon hours to actually get a real ID or a driver's license. Mm-hmm.
And then when you factor in the economic cost of that to people, you know, who's got hours and hours in their day potentially to just stand around waiting for, you know, their ID and such. And so that is why, you know, again, we're sort of Ash is really sort of speaking what I'm saying, writing what I'm saying. Really, like there's very clearly a one-sidedness to this because whilst there are there's absolutely like electoral problems in all the states in America. Like anywhere that uses first past the post is going to have these problems. But clearly, there's one side that has overwhelmingly doubled down on these anti-democratic measures and these anti-democratic actions in the interest of their political power. You know, someone in people in the Republican Party think, okay, we don't necessarily have the best chance of winning this election if everyone who wants to vote votes. So how are ways we can get voting to be curtailed in a way that's less direct than literally cutting off the election? And that, lo and behold, we see all these tactics that we've just discussed here, right? So that I think that's the point I'm sort of trying to make to you here. Like that's why I think, for as much as it's good to try and be communicative and speak to everyone and such, at some point you've got to say, actually, there's a group of people here which are exploiting this good faith and are using it to mistreat the system.
I think I see what you're meaning. People who are using it as a way to exploit it for their own power. I do think at some point, I think in some areas it's okay to have. I think it's okay to actually bar some people from serving in public service if they have previously like taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution or support democracy. If you're going constantly doing it over and over and over again, to use the system to exploit or abuse their power, that does warrant to be barring you from for serving on future public offices. But I think that should be severely limited because that can also be used as a way for the government to also weaponize that. That should be limited in a way because so the government can't weaponize that against their political opponents to bar someone that has a totally different viewpoint than other people because as we saw like in 2024 when the Democrats even in New York City put Trump through a lot of these investigations that didn't really and also found him when Trump was on those criminal trials and he was convicted he was found guilty on 34 felony counts of like hush money cases. That only further helped his campaign. Even though he that just further helped him with the American public to actually get elected. It needs to be
Okay, sorry to cut you off then. So several things there. I think that the risk of, say, us putting in, because like you just said about it, like, yeah, of course there is a scenario where you put in place a measure that you can be removed from office if you've breached the laws of the country or whatever, and then someone twists that to persecute political enemies and such. But that is true of any mechanism of power or function anyway, right? Like if you make a source of energy and then someone plugs in their like death gun or something, like of course you could say, well, if it wasn't about energy, then it wouldn't have happened. But that is then on society to make the democratic structures as democratic as possible, so that that can't happen. Like to distribute power as evenly as possible, so that no one person can, as Trump has done with the current system, climb to a position where they can just overrule laws of land and annul judges and all the other heinous stuff that he's been doing. So I think that is part of why I would say a more left-wing approach is needed, because you're trying to deconstruct the ability of individuals to have the power to become like corrupt and claim to power. Because if because it's not as though like in the perfect, like, it's not as though every single person is going to be an angel and act perfectly in accordance with what is good and such, right? But in a world that doesn't let people just accumulate endless political power, that person that is devious and bad and whatever, they aren't going to be as easily able to get into government and get into a position where they're just uncontested and able to just do what they want in government. Someone's going to say, okay, well, you've done this, and now we're going to execute this action to be able to get rid of you. And then just to come on to that Trump stuff, because I think that's really interesting. Like, absolutely, you're quite right. Trump has many charges against him, of which he's been found guilty of. Ash said in the chat 34, like he said. But the fact that the prosecution were not as rigorous in actually, Attorney General and such not really putting his feet to the fire, and the fact that the Supreme Court has tons of Republican appointed judges on it who basically have now given Trump the the executive power to have presidential decisions not be seen as criminal acts. Like, these are some of the things that have helped him. And then the fact that the electoral system is so, as we're both here agreeing, right? Like the fact that Trump has a lot of people that support him despite these charges and see him as the victim of some state police hunt or something, doesn't that isn't in contestation with the fact that the US electoral system now has a party which doesn't even receive 25% of the American population's vote to then win all the power in society, right? Like
it's also similar to what's going on like in Germany. The AfD and the previous election got around they became the second largest party after in the German federal election, and I think the government actually labeled them as an extremist party, and I feel like that is, in my opinion, just labeling the second largest like party faction as an extremist party is not gonna. I don't think that's really healthy. I think they should be willing to actually cooperate and work with those people, or else they're just gonna make their support, in my opinion, stronger.
But their actual the AfD have actual Nazis in them, like the actual successors to literal Nazis who were in Nazi Germany. Like, so it's not it's not the case that they're sort of just flippantly throwing it out. They're actually actively people who were involved and connected with the atrocities of the Second World War, right?
But I think just like marginalizing people is just gonna make them more extreme and more like
tend. But they're already extreme. Like the AfD, like, because it's not as though because it's a common sort of, I hate to use the word meme, but like it's a thing of people saying, oh, you call everyone a Nazi and such, but like these people, there's no hyperbole here. These people are literally the direct successors to fascists who served in the Nazi government. And not only that, but it's not even like, at some point you have to call a spade and say, yeah, these people are actively trying to return us to the horrors of our history. Like, they're Holocaust deniers, they're people who literally were part of the campaign to keep the German populace the way they were in the Second World War. So like, it's at some point you got to think, okay, is there a moral imperative to actually identify these people as a threat to everyone's collective safety and most, obviously the people they're actively gunning for, and say, yeah, we've got to do something now. We can't work with these people.
I do understand that, but I think there's always a way to like finding a way to actually compromise with them and collaborate with them, and actually talk talk to them like maybe making like some sort of deal like taming and no uh try trying to actually get them to soften some of their hardline policy stances. I don't think I read too much about the where they stand on most of the issues, but it's just finding a way to talk to them and actually where they can get them to like maybe soften their hardline approach into public policy, a lot of their policy positions.
But I mean, like I get where you're coming from. Like, there's that sort of inherent within us all. We want to work together and stuff and help people like come together and such. But I think the mistake that's been made is that we're not like trying to fix a car or trying to well actually let's think about it, actually. Like if we're trying to build a car and someone comes to you with ideas which just don't have any connection to like the scientific laws of motion or whatever, like that person at some point has to be told, no, I'm sorry, we can't work with you. The car you want to build is just not going to work. And so the same thing applies with the fascists, who, for as much as firstly, like they're fascists, but secondly, they have ideas incompatible with human survival and human well-being. They fundamentally want to exploit and kill other people for their own power. And they might not say that up front because they know how the world works and they know they can't just openly say it straight away. But they're here as fascists and we have to identify them as that. And I think there's also in the German example, there's actually historical evidence for this. Like Chancellor Hindenburg thought the same thing. He thought, yeah, we'll work with these guys. We've got some ideas, but they're quite popular, and maybe we can sort of rein in their more questionable ideas. And then Hitler took complete power, became Führer, and we got the rest of World War II and the Holocaust and all the other horrible stuff that happened as a consequence. Like we know what happens when we work with fascists. So we've got to learn from our predecessors and sort of think, okay, let's stop this now. No matter how well connected and loud the fascists are, we've got to say, okay, these guys just can't be part of a functioning democracy. We've got to say, no, you guys have to leave this stuff out. Otherwise, you're done, and we got to act now.
If they're disregarding human life, then you can't really you shouldn't sometimes be able to work with them. I can definitely understand that. Because I believe like we should be always working to improve the lives of ordinary people and actually ensuring that they too can live their lives the way they want to see that they want to live.
Exactly. And part of that is identifying that fascism runs in counter to that, right? Like they and I think it's also like even if we ignored the fact that these people are fascists and have ideas fundamentally against human rights and such, like they also just aren't trustworthy people, like full stop. Like in France, for instance, we're sort of seeing a similar situation, right? A popular what are they called? What's her party called? Marine Le Pen's party. I forget the name.
Is it the FN, the National Party?
Yes, it's like National Front, but National Rally. So anyway, she has been banned from standing because she has been she embezzled millions from her party and from the French government and such, right? Like these people are fascist, not only because it's not just that they're bad people, they actively have policies designed to take money from the rest of society and funnel it to run it resources and wealth and such funneled to their cause. So it's not even just that we fundamentally disagree with their ideas because they're obviously lethal and unjust. They actively steal money and resources from the places they take over, as we're also seeing in America, where Trump's family have made a fortune just from being in office and being able to connect themselves to things. So it's like a case of preservation almost, like of democracy and of a country by taking the preemptive strike course and saying, yeah, these guys are not fit to have any consideration for political office or to let alone be included in our cooperative measures and such.
I can definitely understand where you're coming from. If people have been historically engaging in corruption just to gain power, I do think that definitely does warrant them being barred from office for like a certain period of time. But as I said earlier, I think that should somewhat be limited so it's not exploited. It's not exploited to actually. It's not exploited in a way to actually kick people off the ballot that are not a threat to democracy.
I mean, sure, for one, surely if it was one way or the other, like if you could only if it was, I mean, it's not like this, but like if you could like if some people ended up being caught in the crossfire, but you had no more fascists, versus you don't catch anyone that's in the crossfire, but now there's fascists in government and they start unpiecing it. Like, I think we know which one we'd pick, right? But it's also, I think there's not like, I don't think it's the case that people would be wrongly like persecuted by this, because if you're like the sort of person that is under suspicion of being a fascist is already engaging in some fairly dubious things. And it's not as though like this law is just a button you can press and said politician is just like expunged from life and literally ejected like out of the house or whatever. Like it's something which would go through a proper process, as with any impeachment or measure to act against someone. But I'll go back to that car metaphor, like a bridge, for instance. Like if one day we were both on a like an architect's team to build some bridge somewhere, and then this third guy shows up and they're like, yeah, I've got this brand new idea. We're going to make it out of breadsticks. It's going to be made out of breadsticks. And then he's actually started making this bridge, and obviously his bit just collapses because it's made out of breadsticks. What like we wouldn't be thinking, okay, well maybe we just wait a year or so and then we'll let this guy come back and see if he's changed. Like that guy's never coming back on the project again, because if that bridge gets made, the first car that drives on it is just going straight into the river, right? Like there's a clear consequence for continuing to put up with and sustain bad ideas. And so we've got to take that same, like with any other part of society, like we don't think, oh, well, these guys have an opinion, we've got to try and meet them in the middle. We think there are things which are bad, which we know are bad, and we've seen have negative consequences, that we draw a red line and say, no, we can't have this anymore. And so we've got to sort of move away from, because it's tricky, right? Because people's political ideas are often, it's a web of things. It's not as black and white as Adolf Hitler versus like the average person. But that's one of the dangers of fascism. Like it can embed itself into the normative ideas of people. And so we've got to be really ruthless and say, yeah, here are some red lines. If you start going near these red lines, I'm afraid you're going to be potentially liable for action taken against you.
There'll be severe consequences if you violate the democratic order, or if you try to take away someone else's right to express themselves in society. And I do agree with that, and I do agree with what you said. Like not everyone can be saved. It's like what I learned on a most recent podcast with the Republican gubernatorial candidate of California, Chad Bianco. He was making the argument because California throughout currently has been moving towards a Scandinavian type of prison model in California, where they're focusing more on rehabilitation. And Bianco was making the argument that you can't rehabilitate everyone. And to some degree that is correct in some regard. You can't save everyone, but you can. But I believe you can save the more. You can save a lot of people, but you just can't save everyone. You can't in some areas. You can't work with everyone. I do get that argument, but you can work with a lot of people.
I mean, I get what you're saying. I mean, I would say rehabilitation, like it's a little bit, it's different. The guy like rehabilitation with like prisoners is sort of thinking, a society that produces so many people that end up in prison. It's sort of looking at the material concerns and such, but it's a little bit different with. I mean, Ash again earlier said, "What is the line?" Like because we've got Nazis, like people who openly believe and want a world order that actively excludes black people, gay people. They want women's rights to be stopped. They want disabled people to stop existing. Like they fundamentally are at odds with democracy and justice and human rights, and they only want them to be extremely wealthy whilst everyone else is off, I don't know, in the Amazon factory floor packaging products for them to use and such, right? So at some point, like I feel like we're sort of I suppose that's the question, isn't it? Like, what is the, because you say at some point there's got to be a line, right? And I think on the left, the reason we're sort of a bit critical of centrism is because we're saying that this line needs to be much, much, much earlier than what we're seeing. Like we've got to be able to identify the dog whistles, be able to see that people who support these causes aren't good, and at the very least, say, okay, if you have been working with Donald Trump and if you're in this party and you're not taking active steps to like divorce yourself from all of this, you're not fit to be part of the process of democratic function, right? Like Robin says, if you commit crimes against your own government, you should not be allowed to hold office. Like that expunges quite a bit of the current GOP.
I think I definitely agree with that. If you do commit crimes in government, you should not be allowed to run for office. Like things like engaging in government conspiracy, or even trying to find ways to actually take away the people's right to vote, as we saw like in Texas, and I think in Indiana that Republicans tried to redraw the district lines in Indiana to give the Republicans an unfair advantage, like engaging in like some sort of partisan gerrymandering, or like as you said, engaging in embezzlement to actually further your own political interests. And also, like what Trump tried to do in the 2020 election, trying to overturn election results, especially like in Georgia. I remember his like phone call with Brad Raffensperger saying, find me 5,000 or 500 more votes.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I do think that is where the line has to be drawn. No one should be allowed to try to overturn an election like that, because you're essentially overturning the will of the people. So I think where the line can be drawn is not seeking to go against the constitutional order, or go against the will of the people, or if you're engaging in corruption, or trying to find ways to suppress the people's vote, I think that warrants being not allowed to run for office in the democratic process.
I agree. They're good things that we should definitely try and pursue and such. And so then what I would put to you is the phrase "prevention is better than cure." Now, obviously, cures are good. It's good to address, like when Trump, for instance, does the things like the 2021 January the 6th attacks and such. When he went to the Capitol and such, like that is absolutely what we should be curing by putting him in court. And hopefully, I envision a future where if we somehow manage to get Trump out of office and the GOP, all of his cronies and him and his family, etc., they're all off to court, and they are basically charged with all the heinous stuff they've been doing for the last however many years, right? But
for that, I can agree.
Exactly, right? But we also need to prevent things too. So in the same way that if we discovered someone was putting like mercury and lead into food, we ban those things from being like a thing you can add to food for whatever reason. We go to various political structures and such, like social media and just media like Fox News and stuff, and say, okay, all this stuff is actively undermining and a risk to people's well-being. So we've got to do things about it now to stop the next Donald Trump from coming to power and doing the same, doing more than the last person, right? Like, if we we sort of, instead of meeting in the middle, we, like we say, have a line and we say, okay, you're going to come to us because this is now a threshold for how a society functions. No, we're not going to tolerate, say, a news network like Fox News, which is just like, it's not, you know, it's not news, is it? It's an entertainment show that deliberately hires people with a certain political leaning to sell books and make money and spread a conservative worldview. Elon Musk bought Twitter, right, and has spent millions on the GOP. Like, I think I read, is it $250 million he spent on the last election cycle?
I think you're right about that.
Right, exactly, right. So like that isn't democratic. That's actively using your money to influence the the way the next election goes. And you thought, I mean, I don't know if you are still on Twitter, but I stopped using it like regularly a few years ago, and
I'm still on Twitter because I still have a big following on Twitter. And I use it to get my messaging out there, where I stand on a lot of issues.
Yeah, like I used to, because it's tricky, right? Because for years it was just sort of my like go-to social media app, and then Musk bought it, and the site just slowly got worse and worse. And then around the time of the election, the amount of just slop and garbage that was on there, like just actively pro far right Trump-esque stuff, like people appearing in your notifications that you never even followed, spreading the most outrageous lies about society. And it's like, this is terrible, but this is at the same time, so many people are being affected by this just open splurge of far right garbage onto your phone, which you can't even, like, I mean, the notifications just show up. Like, you have to actively go and turn them off for them to not show up, and even then. So, you know, I stopped using it, but it shouldn't. It should be someone needs to be able to be in a place of power to say, okay, this is clearly undermining democracy, right? As someone who actively spreads misinformation and lies on a platform which he bought to do that, and then he gets to be, and literally, it's not even just Trump. He's in office, Musk, basically, influencing decisions and using. I mean, how many contracts does SpaceX get awarded because of their connections to the administration? So, one of the things that'd be really useful to do is say, okay, we're not going to have this anymore. There's now a firm limit to how much you can spend per election cycle. And if you go over that limit, off the ballot, like that. And then all these billionaires that have clearly gone with Trump to try and get even wealthier are just unable now to, if you're found to go over this number, you're annulled, right? Like,
yeah.
And then that would stop, like, but then that requires, for that to happen, for things like that to happen, that needs to be something which that would actively mean right-wing parties are then coming to you and meeting your terms, or they're not standing for election anymore because they've not met the terms. Like, they can't be. What I'm trying to get to you is that there can't be this sort of centrist position that sort of allows for some of right-wing stuff to be like sustained and such. Because the second you give someone like Elon Musk, say, a wedge into the door, all those billions are being put to use to try and get more and more and more, and then you end up with, you know, Twitter today, where it's like, you know, just a cesspit, basically.
I think that does make sense, because you can't always be Mr. Nice Guy all the time. Because if you continue to be Mr. Nice Guy, then those other people who are abusing the system will continually take advantage of you. And I think that's definitely one of the reasons why Democrats have gerrymandered, especially like in Illinois, to counteract the gerrymandering that Republicans did in Tennessee. I know they did it in North Carolina. They also definitely did it in Oklahoma as well. And that's one of the reasons why California did it, because Texas did it also. They're just trying to maximize their political gains to hold Republicans accountable as well. But
to counteract what happened before.
But I do think some people on the left are also. I do think some people. Well, I'm not going to get to that right now. I can't word it properly.
Well, I'll tell you what. Come back to that in a minute then, once you've worked out how to word it. But yeah, you know, it's as you've just said, right? Like, gerrymandering is something which has happened because of the actions the GOP took to try and do it in the first place. And if you wanted to, so like, if we were going to sort of look at how these elections take place, if we were going to, as we said at the start, like, we want PR or ranked choice or something which is a fairer way to translate voter sentiment to political office and power. To do that, we're challenging existing structures of power. Because, like, if if you are in the GOP right now, and the Democrats, to be fair, the Democrats are of this as well. Like if you're in a party which is unpopular but has disproportionately more political power to people that actually vote for you, you have a vested interest in sustaining the system because you're being kept in office by the fact that you don't need to have 50% of the voters, you just need to have the most votes out of the existing candidates. So if now there's absolutely ways in which people with more of a conscience, people who think, okay, maybe we do need to have a bit of justice, people who are a bit more left wing would say, yeah, let's actually act and try and make this power structure a bit more even. But equally, there's plenty of right wing people who see this and think, oh, well, no, we've got to keep this how it is because we don't like change because we're conservatives, or because we like to control what we've got, or even people that aren't necessarily overtly trying to deny democracy might just think, well, we're the ones who've been in for a while, we know what we're doing, so maybe it's better if one of our two parties does it. So because of that, there's the existing structures of power have a natural reaction to try and preserve their power, right? So because we have these systems of power, it's harder to try and get the change that would be better. Like, for instance, in the UK, we had a referendum in 2011, I want to say, to switch from first past the post voting to proportional representation, like European countries mainly have. And it wasn't. It was put to a referendum to the people in the UK, and they voted no. So people voted to keep the voting system the same, and that's because the existing Conservative Party, the leading party at the time, didn't want this. So they had a coalition government with Lib Dems, a Liberal Democrat Party, a smaller party, but won enough of the seats to be in power with the Conservatives. So obviously they're thinking, okay, well, our percentage of the vote is much closer to the Conservatives than the number of seats we have in Parliament. So let's put this in place to try and get this. And it got voted down. It wasn't accepted because it, if you are a mainstream party, especially one like the Conservatives, who have never had the majority of support in the country, you've got a vested interest. And so part of that rejection of centrism, which I'm sort of trying to argue for here, is saying, okay, clearly there's people in the right who, even in their best hearts, are never going to yield the sort of things we need to make democracy fairer. So at some point, you've got to say, okay, enough's enough. We're not meeting in the middle anymore. You're coming to us, or I'm sorry, but you're out the door with the other guys. And thank you, Lasty. It's a very kind comment you've put in the chat there.
Yeah. I do see where you're coming from, especially like it's really hard to get the status quo to actually change the system because they benefit from the system. I think one common example that comes to mind is like what's going on in Canada. Canada has been trying to get rid of first past the post also, but I know I think it was in 2015, Justin Trudeau promised that 2015 would be the last Canadian federal election to be using first past the post, but he decided not to do it because he didn't want to move away from first past the post because he feels like that would that could actually disadvantage him because the first past the post is what put him into power. But he did support like things like preferential voting, but there was like major disagreements with the Liberals and also the NDP because there were some people within the NDP that the NDP wanted proportional representation. But Justin Trudeau didn't want it because he felt like that would give power to extreme ideologies. Or in other words, hurt his chances of holding on to political power pretty much.
Exactly, right? Like, you make the point there very eloquently. Like the party that said they were going to do it quite liked having the power, and maybe weren't as keen to then make the full changes they needed to, which then in the future allows for less democracy because it's pooled in existing hands. But that's exactly why people on the left would say that we need to have this breakdown of the pyramid of sorts, like a power structure, to one which is more egalitarian and one which has that actual sense of equality and equity and actual ability to hold someone to account. Because part of the reason we're in these problems that we are now is that, certainly in America, Trump is someone who just has disproportionately more power than everyone else. Like if you or I were to commit a crime, we are likely ending up in legal trouble, right? Like we're not going to be able to. Certainly, if we have 88 or charges against us, we're not likely going to be facing a great future, right? But Trump is a billionaire. Trump is in a political party which has, despite numerous times breaking laws and being against the interests of American people, continues to dominate elections. I said dominate elections. Continues to maintain power through elections, even when they are deeply despised by many people in the country. And so,
But I would say some people within on the left in the Democratic Party is also guilty of that. We definitely saw like Hillary Clinton is a corrupt official. I think she definitely engaged in also corruption with her email scandals.
I mean, it's not quite on the same scale, but let's take that point, because I agree that Hillary Clinton is not exactly the most popular of people. However, that also makes the point for me, right? Because there's someone who has disproportionately more influence in the party than perhaps people would want her to. But because of the nature of power pooling in this system, is very hard, and sort of similar ideologues are very hard to dislodge. Like the actual sort of more popular policies within Democrat circles that would be a more, I'm not going to say fully left wing, but like a more to the left of what is the norm in America, is harder to get into play because of all the existing power structures that stop it from being realized. And so that is why we're saying so urgently, we've got to really stop having the center as like we've got to all meet here. We've got to say, actually, let's realign, let's set new boundaries and say, okay, if you are in favor of things which are not helping us forward the progress and betterment of humanity, then out you go. Like, you need to stop. And there's some things which aren't for debate, like human life mattering. Two people, at least two people, have both made a comment that overturning Citizens United would be a great way. That's an interesting way of wording it, Lasty. Of changing things, and I absolutely agree. But this again, I mean, I'd be interested to hear your opinion on this actually first. But this is definitely one which would be quite useful, I think.
I do agree with overturning Citizens United, but I think another good reform that can also help return power back to the people is definitely repealing the 1929 Permanent Apportionment Act, or in other words, uncapping the House, to definitely enlarge the size of the House of Representatives to accommodate more representatives, because a bigger House would definitely lower the ratio of how many people an individual legislature represents. Because currently, I think today a single representative today represents around, I think it was 767,000 people, 767,000 voters. I could be wrong. And representatives representing more people has ultimately led to districts getting way more big. And when you have bigger districts with more, and representatives serving more populated districts, that actually makes the wealthy have more prowess and efficacy in our elections. And I think expanding the size of the House would also definitely, for one, it would also reduce some of the negative effects that we have with partisan gerrymandering, but it would also make representatives more accountable to ordinary people, because they would be representing less people. And actually, in turn, you're actually helping historically disadvantaged communities to actually get elected to Congress if we ever expand the size of the House of Representatives. I do think overturning. I'm sorry. I do think overturning Citizens United is one area. Like capping the number of, limiting how much spending that you can spend on a political campaign is good. But I also think expanding and enlarging the size of the House of Representatives would also reduce the power of the wealthy and actually give more power to ordinary people, simply because As I read in a peer-reviewed source at one point in time, larger legislative bodies greatly distribute policy-making influence far more broadly to more and more people, which is all about which really highlights the central theme of democracy. Democracy is all about rule by the many, not rule by the few, not rule by the one person. It's rule by the many people in society.
Exactly. Like, in terms of a pragmatic thing to do, it's important to try and make the functions at the houses of government and such as representative as possible, and try and make them connect to people that actually exist and such. Now, obviously, my inner sort of radical voice is here, so it's going to be even more radical than that, and we should have a entirely different system. But in terms of pragmatically, for right in this moment, yes, you're quite right. That would be a good thing. But in terms of Citizens United overturning it and such like that, is something which would be massively democratic, right? Like to actually say, okay, corporations are not people, and we need to think really seriously about what we're doing in government and what restrictions we place on people to, think about how society conducts itself in these moments, is something which curtails wealth and curtails the ability to accumulate power and wealth. And these are fundamentally right-wing ideas, right? Like the whole sort of premise of the capitalist structure of society that right-wing ideas ultimately coordinate themselves around are about that unfettered ability to pursue capital. You like the idea that any one person is an actor on the market trying to better their wealth and their status via the tools of the market. And so whilst we're sitting here saying, yeah, we've got to do these things to improve democracy, someone else would say, well, this is my market opportunity. This is my means of making a profit. And whilst it sounds horrendous, right, like the idea of profiting off an election, it's something which is done every single time the election rolls around, and something which, when you try and bring up, right when people say, no, you're talking rubbish, you're not being serious, you're just trying to curtail our freedoms, and then it gets dropped, and then it gets the next election, and the same problems arise. So to tie us into our theme, our centrist perspective continues to see these people given a seat at the table and then able to continue pushing these, if not pushing the decisions to the next election, actively shutting down the conversation about, should we spend this much money on elections? Should you be able to finance billions for certain candidates? Should you be able to use a social media platform to basically serve as the Trump social media campaign account? Like, there's got to be that critical, no, enough's enough. We've got to actually start excluding someone, because it's not, because I think that's the thing as well. Like, it's not that the person can't come. Like, it's not as though you're saying the person is banned. You're saying these ideas will disqualify you from this conversation, and people with these ideas therefore are now, they've been marked, right? Like we've identified these people are in possession of fascist ideas and therefore can't be part of a functioning democracy. So that's, I think, that is the real stickler here. Like, it's not as though someone is saying, Joe Smith, you're not coming along, I just get lost. Like, they're saying this person has openly identified their support for the AFD or for National Front or whatever party, therefore they can't be given a seat at the how do we make this country work better. Oh, look, that person is Joe Smith, you're not going to come into the party conference or whatever.
I can see what you mean. People who are who have been known to abuse the system, sometimes they can't be trusted. Sometimes if they've been repeatedly, constantly doing it, and at that point, you definitely need drastic change to change the system for the better, to actually make it more democratic, and actually kick out the bad actors who have been abusing the system for such a long time. I do understand that, because as someone told me in a YouTube video, it was Let's Talk Elections comment section. He said, "Why are you a centrist? You should be a progressive, because centrist means you're empathetic to the status quo, and progressive means you're challenging the status quo. You're challenging the existence of the establishment and actually vying for a better world overall." to actually end the abuses of the political system that's currently going on, and actually hold to really draw a hard line and actually hold people to account and say we're not going to put up with your corruption anymore. We're not going to put up with you trying to silence people's right to vote away anymore. We're going to uphold democracy, and we're going to find ways to strengthen our democracy that you sold for long have taken away from millions of Americans. I do understand what you're meaning by that. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. And so I think that like Ash in the chat again asks how someone is, how this sort of, because you say centrism can do these things, right? Like progressive elements are found within centrism, but I suppose Ash is curious, and I imagine a few of us are, as to how like what the center is doing, therefore, in this situation to hold the potential Nazis and such, and the Nazis who are in office now, for instance, accountable. Because the stuff you've been saying about expanding the House and trying to curb the amount of money you can spend on an election and putting in fairer democratic voting methods, they are all ultimately, as you've just said a minute ago, things which challenge the status quo. And in the term progressive, trying to progress us forward, right? Like someone, because with every decision that we've had to get us to a point where we have any democracy at all, like, has been a step against the status quo, a step away from what has traditionally existed, right? Like, so in the UK, we didn't just like emerge from, I don't know, Ben Nevis and suddenly have our voting rights, just all of us straight away. It took a very long time for even some of us to get our voting rights, and it's a battle which continues to be contested and fought over. Because for the longest time it was absolute monarchy, king and his nobles and serfs. And if you're a serf, then good luck getting the harvest that you can sell enough crops to, not even sell, so you can give enough crops to the lord of the land. And you better hope they haven't accused you of being a witch this month, otherwise off with your head or whatever, put in the stocks and such, right?
Yeah.
So the idea that we've come from that to now today, where you and I both are lucky enough to live in countries which have some quality of life and such. Like, we're not, obviously there's problems in our lives, but we because of the efforts of people who've spoken out against things and who've taken labor movements and workers and left-wing action, like, we're able to have a roof over our heads and eat healthily and be able to sort of not live in suffering, basically. Like, that has taken massive acts of justice and acts against the status quo. So in my mind, when we say, oh, we're going to be in the center, we're going to be sort of trying to take the best of both sides or whatever, like, there's almost like it's like putting a chain on ourselves on, because it's like we're not trying to I apologize if that sounds crude, but yeah, like we should keep, exactly, we've got to keep on powering forward, not sort of just putting the brakes on and saying, yeah, we've come far enough now, let's try and get a bit of balance or whatever.
Sometimes old democratic institutions, the thing is that democratic institutions have to always constantly be reformed, or else it just becomes old and stale to the point that the system can eventually be abused. At that point, democracy always has to find ways to evolve and change overall to actually to stay prosperous in the world, and even in the United States of America, we constantly have to keep reforming our democracy if we want to continually to safeguard it from the political extremes.
Exactly. So then that, as you've just said, that constant change, that constantly being able to adapt and meet the new challenges in the face, is something which is fundamentally at odds with a movement like conservatism, which literally wants to conserve the status quo. Like people, I often think conservative, like the actual word itself, isn't really paid enough attention to. Like, if you are a conservative, what are you conserving? And that conservation is ultimately of the things which exist, the social fabric of society. They want to keep the conditions of their society the same. And so if we then are centrist and we're sort of trying to pick the best of both bits, like the things which would be, like, as a conservative would say, oh, I want to conserve the environment. And it's like, yeah, of course, everyone does. Like, people, like unless you're like, I don't know, a coal magnate or something. Like, yeah, of course you want to conserve the environment, but clearly that is being advocated for better by the person which is saying, yeah, we've got to maybe depower some of these fossil fuel companies from being able to just have the free market right to spew out tons of carbon emissions to burn coal and make a profit and such. And yet the conservative, largely doesn't care, right? Because they say, well, the market is always right, and these people are making money for the economy, and is climate change even real in the first place? And just is actively embracing like fake
climate deniers.
Exactly. But that is the danger of consistently tolerating these like right wing and now far right parties and movements and such, because they don't have an interest in the progress that we should all be striving for and the democracy, Robin says, that we need to fight for, because they're tethered to things that just exist in society and they don't want to change because they're either benefiting from it or they're scared of that change. Like, it's at some point we've got to say, certainly in this moment in time at least, yeah, actually maybe the center needs to move several kilometers back to the left a little bit, and then we'll talk about what both sides can offer. Like we've got to, I mean, as you can probably guess, I'm a little bit more left wing anyway, but like at some point you've got to look at what's happening right now and say, yeah, maybe it's time to park the centrism for a little bit, and let's let these guys come over here to us and say, yeah, we've been making some mistakes, time to ditch the right wing stuff.
We definitely do need some radical transformation in society to actually get us back to democracy. Pretty much, we have to constantly keep, as one guy just said in the chat, we have to keep fighting for democracy if we are to keep it, because there will always be bad actors wanting to exploit the system over and over and over and over again. And if you just let them keep exploiting it, then democracy eventually dies. In order to safeguard it, you have to protect it and call out and hold people accountable who are attempting to abuse the system for their own personal gain.
Exactly. And so that is why ultimately, I think that's sort of core to what I'm saying, right? Like the days where, well, I mean, I argue those days never really existed, but like certainly in this moment, there's a need for action that is inevitably radical because of the way our society is to tackle this far right threat. And elections are one way, of course, because they're the sort of metric for which we sort of conduct democracy. But it's also just in our social functions too, right? Like just the simple act of not tolerating casual bigotry or whatever, the act of trying to be more considerate of the perspective of marginalized people when there's like a big discussion about various human rights and they're not like there. Like there's an element of the small things add up to big things, and there's also the big things need to be targeted as well. Like every moment in our days is an opportunity to reject the right wing stuff that we've got going on at the moment, and we can get there, but not if we're unwilling to ditch the pretense of compromise. Because that's the thing as well. Like the fascists, like they know that it's like we are naturally inclined to try and be cooperative and hear people out and try and think, okay, what's this person gonna bring to the table? And so they are almost playing a game to try and convince people of even the slightest of their talking points to then instigate the next talking point and the next talking point. And before long, you're sucked into just this spiral of more and more far right stuff. And we're seeing that with in the UK, like in my country, the stuff that the Labour Party was saying a decade ago is massively to the left of what they're saying now. Like some of the stuff that Keir Starmer comes out with is like stuff you'd expect UKIP and the BNP and stuff to be, British National Party, sorry, to be saying 10, 15 years ago or so. Like the stuff about being concerned about living next to immigrants, or the anti-trans stuff that they've been saying. Like it's staggering how much the fascists have been able to just normalize in society. And in large part, that's because there's not been enough pushback. There's not been enough people saying, yeah, these guys have bad opinions and we're not going to be tolerant. We're not going to tolerate it anymore. And it's not, and also the bad faith, you're attacking my free speech whenever a fascist is criticized. Like, that needs to be identified as a bad faith, obvious lie, because it's not something which is the case. It's them deliberately misrepresenting the fact that they are attacking people's rights to try and pass it off as, oh, you're trying to stop me from speaking.
And I think another thing I would like to add is definitely another thing that the political establishment currently in the United States has also normalized is definitely the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system in the United States has been perpetually known to actually to create injustices and inequalities, especially many I don't think a lot of Americans know that slavery has never gone away in the United States. It has been evolved within the criminal justice system because, like it says in the 13th Amendment, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except if the person has been duly convicted of a crime. And if you've been duly convicted of a crime, you can essentially be re-enslaved again. And that has been used as a loophole to actually to re-enslave people by finding ways to criminalize other people. And our prison system has definitely been used as a way to further perpetuate injustice again. It's like what I've learned in my one of my classes in graduate school. Racism never goes away. It just evolves into a newer form. It first started with slavery, then eventually it evolved into something like Jim Crow. But when Jim Crow ended, it was further replaced with the era of mass incarceration. And that has led to millions of people being denied their fundamental right after being labeled a convicted felon for the rest of their life. And I do understand where you're coming. And the current political establishment have definitely normalized the criminal justice system in a way that perpetuates injustice and inequalities after people who have been convicted of a felony, or of any crime, even though it might not be violent. It might be a non-violent crime, such as simple possessions of drugs, for instance.
Exactly. I struggle to disagree with any of that, to be honest. It was, I very much agree. Like, it's definitely the case with all of what you just said there about the justice system, justice, and the ongoing mistreatment and exploitation of people in society is perpetuated through people writing dodgy laws and applying laws in a way that disproportionately affects people. But clearly, I think with this, Ash says, the left knows, the left knew, but evidently that doesn't translate to wider politics, not just because of ignorance, but because of deliberate maleficence. People who absolutely understand all of what you just said, but stand to benefit from it, and either explicitly through some of the stuff that Trump's been doing, or tacitly through the for-profit prison system, or the way that corporations benefit from an underrepresented, exploited population. This system is maintained, and that's, again, you make the case almost for me, I think, because you clearly understand the stuff that's going on really quite eloquently, but you still sort of, I know your impulse to try and meet some of these people in the middle and try and give benefit of doubt and such, and being a centrist and all, like, almost lets this stuff continue, because for instance, when if there's like a cross-party committee on something, or like a multi-party panel to try and improve the experience of prisoners, and someone says, yeah, prisoners are basically stripped of their rights, many of their crimes are not serious crimes, but actually just economically caused. If we, instead of pouring money into the prison system, put it into their education, their transportation, their employment opportunities, all the stuff that's in their actual life, we would massively reduce the number of people going into prison and probably save ourselves a lot of money and resources in the process.
I can
That
definitely
is
get behind that.
exactly. But then, even if you had like 6 Republicans there and 5 were like, yeah, this is actually all right, um, one of them, even just one, saying, oh, actually, I've been on the phone to Walmart and they say they stand to lose a lot of money from this, and then who convinces their other people in the party to go along with this because it's a corporate friendly policy or whatever, that person shoots the whole thing down for everyone because now Walmart or whichever I mean, I'll say Walmart, it's one of a number of corporations, but in this example,
Mm-hmm.
they benefit from like basically unpaid labor taking place in the prison system, so they can make cheap items and clothes and goods and such, and
And
then
it's
increase
completely
their
wrong. Yeah.
exactly it is completely wrong. But because it's tied up in the political, because it's sustained by right-wing ideas and right-wing processes, it doesn't go away. Another one, like, I think most people can agree probably that it's bad that healthcare is just so expensive in the US. Like in the UK, obviously we have the NHS, we have the rights to be able to walk into hospital and see our doctor. Now, admittedly, austerity, which is obviously another right-wing policy, has made the waiting times very high, and it's under a lot of stress at the moment because of the money that's been cut from it and such. But if I were to, when this debate ends, fall over and cut myself and want to go and see a doctor, I have the right to go to my hospital and see that doctor, and it does not come out of, I don't have to pay up front for it. In America, if that same situation were to happen to me, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how. Maybe it's just a cut. I'd be able to find something. But if I had like a serious illness, like there's a good chance that I either go bankrupt or I die. Right. And most people can agree that they don't want this to be the case. They want something which allows them to have access to a doctor. But continually, at every point in US history, basically, there's been moneyed interests that say, no, we want this to be a commodity. We want these corporations to have this monopoly over healthcare in practice and cost and such, so that they can make a profit from it. I mean, you see the money that's made from this industry, and that money doesn't go back into the actual hospitals people. It goes into some shareholders' bank account. And so when we have this, but then when we say this, when we say, yeah, we've got to change that this is how healthcare is managed, there's someone saying, oh, it's unaffordable, it doesn't work, it's bad, it couldn't work in America or whatever. And even though that's just not the case, and as Ash has said, medical bankruptcy isn't something which most modern, most developed countries have to put up with. It gets sustained, and they just like every time. I mean, they were calling Obama like a communist for trying to for what, the Affordable Care Act, which like is barely even like is better than what they had before, obviously, but like is barely even anything close to.
It's just like Trump calling Zoran Mandani a communist because he wants to advocate for like government-run grocery stores and also promising them like universal childcare and free, making buses fast and free, and that's just the kind of like labeling your opponents who want to deliver good for the people. Is that really necessary if you're not doing the people's work to actually improve their lives, then they're gonna turn to other people. That's just simply part of what democracy works. If you fail to serve the people, they're gonna move to the next party to probably might do a better job than you.
Yeah, but then that's the issue we're hitting there, because in a society where everyone had all the information and the rational ability to be able to do it, and we're free of the influences of various negative forces, of course they would move away. They'd say, yeah, this guy's a chump, we're not going to vote for them anymore, let's go to someone else. But in our current system, there's that because there's constantly this idea that, oh, we need Democrats and Republicans to have the country functioning, and never, we've got to have these values, and if parties don't meet these values, then out they go. There's this continued sustenance for people with bad ideas, with bad faith politics and such. And even when you and I both sit here and agree, the fact that we aren't willing to say almost, yeah, we've got a serious parts of the GOP need to be just like abdicated, needs to be just like removed from the political process, is almost that ability for them to keep weaseling in and keep saying, yeah, we've got to have unaffordable healthcare, otherwise, country's going to go bankrupt or whatever. We've got to keep incarcerating random black people because it keeps America safe. We've got to defund all the schools, but give ICE billions because the country's being invaded. Like just obvious nonsense that gets supported. I will say that obviously I'm enjoying this conversation, but my voice is starting to get a bit scratchy. So I may say if we head to we're on an hour 20 minutes, if we head to an hour and 30 minutes as our sort of de facto finish line, which also gives the chat a bit of time to ask some questions that might be wanting answered. But yeah, just a heads up that might be our time to, for like a finish line of sorts.
That sounds good. I like that. Answering the comment section questions.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're in the chat and you want to ask a question, put it in now. I'll try and get them on screen for us to have a little go at answering. But yeah, like just to, I think that because like from what you've said to me in this conversation, we clearly agree on quite a lot. Like I mean, in the video I saw of you, like I even said I think in my comments, that I agree with quite a few of the things you said because it's true. Like we're clearly. I speak to some people and there's that sort of almost not even just denial, just complete like ignorance of what is almost like going on in America to an extent. Like they either completely blind to what Trump is doing, or they know what's going on and they don't care because they actually support it. Clearly, you and I can sort of identify that there's something not quite right with American democracy if people can, some people, like 80 million or so people, can vote for someone, and then they are allowed to have complete control of all 340 million people in America. Is it 340 million? Is it 330 million? I can't remember the exact number.
It's definitely 334 million. But I think that's really the problem with presidential democracies, where the voters separately elect the president and separately elect the members of the legislative branch on two separate votes, and they in the legislature and the president serves different fixed terms, where unlike in parliamentary systems, the legislature is fused with the executive branch and they're kind of have to force to cooperate if they want to pass their legislation. But in the United States example, the president doesn't really need to work with Congress. He can actually exercise a lot of it. Even his federal agencies can make decisions unilaterally without the consent of Congress. And I think that's really dangerous because that makes that puts democracy, in my opinion, at risk. Because for one, if you're giving more power to one person, that just makes the election of the president far more stressful and anxious for millions of Americans, and actually pushes people to the extremes because it also leads to a thing called policy lurch, where when one president does major policy changes and then in the next election a new president comes in, they can start undoing everything the previous administration has done without the consent of Congress, and they can just undo everything just unilaterally, pretty much through executive action. And I think that's not, I don't think that's healthy for democracy. I think the executive, in my opinion, which is one of the reasons why, like, I've also become very supportive of parliamentary democracies, because I feel like that, in my opinion, can help solve some of the can help like reduce one person's power in making decisions, because if you're able to fuse the executive branch with the legislature, I believe that can get elected officials and candidates or even parties to actually want to work together again if the executive and the legislature are fused and have a space to actually resolve their differences.
Yeah, I agree. Right, like the idea that the president can almost just have this jurisdiction to bulldoze themselves into political processes and just write laws and try and get right presidentiary guidance or whatever, and I forget the actual term for that. Executive order, that's it. And try and demand things. And certainly, I mean, I think previous presidents have had this power, but Trump has sort of taken it to almost my word is gospel. You know, I've read somewhere that he someone said, one of his, was it his ex-wife, said that he had a copy of Mein Kampf by his bedside. Now, I don't want to stick to that because that sounds like I don't know if that's hyperbole, but you know, he clearly has made many overtures to the fact that he idolizes and likes being an absolute ruler, and his actions certainly demonstrate that he wants to have this power, and he sees the branches of government as a nuisance, not a part of democracy.
But remember in his 2016 speech, he said, "I alone can fix it," or in some of his marketing, he said, "Trump will fix it." That feels very like very authoritative. To even to say that.
Yeah.
No one has all the ideas in the world
exactly.
to solve problems.
Exactly that. But that statement there, that no one has the idea to solve the world, is directly at odds with the right-wing view, which is that power is for the powerful, that hierarchy is fine, and that if you have the capital to act, then it's your right to do so. And so that is fundamentally why, I mean, fundamentally, if we're trying to solve societal problems, these ideas are at odds with what we're trying to do, because if we're trying to make the world a better place, that betterness is going to contradict someone else's power. And the tension is whether or not we act in the needs of many or we act in the interest of this one person's power. And so that is why when we see Trump and his unquestioned attempts to basically become America's dictator, we got to, we got to sort of say, okay, what other steps have led us here? How can we undo these steps? What do we do to stop this happening again? And each of those ways involve divorcing ourselves from the right-wing functions of society and trying to make things better for everyone. Because there is a way of solving things. It doesn't have to be like this. We can live in a better world, but that world involves identifying what the more negative elements of our political system are and then trying to change them and such. So we're just before an hour and a half mark. I'll let you, if you wanted to reply to that before we go on to the question section of sorts. And then...
I think I'm ready for the questions in the comment section. I'm interested in what people have to say.
Fantastic. I feel like Robin, she is slightly further behind. I think she's not watching this 100% live. I think she's like, I've been looking at the comments, and I reckon she's actually like 10 minutes or so behind our live. So she might hopefully see. But anyway, Lasty says, where is the line where we stop allowing this class of people to keep their boots on our throat? So I believe this was when we were talking about the fact that if you look at the numbers, the number of Trump voters, even in all their might and all their numbers, is nowhere near a majority of people in the UK, in the US, sorry. And Robin actually earlier said something which I have been saying for a very long time. I'm very frustrated about, that Trump was elected with 49.8% of the vote. That is a plurality, not a majority. So it's not even the case that Trump won a majority of the election. He won, I mean, obviously it's nearly 50%, but it's not a majority. More people did not vote for Trump in that election than did. And when you factor in the people that weren't allowed to vote, that didn't get to the voting station, that are disenfranchised anyway, and people who aren't even in the system, like Puerto Ricans, for instance, like there's just no way that we can call MAGA something which is like a democratic majority. So to go back to Lasty's initial question, which I had a second ago, where's the line where we say actually this election result cannot translate to Trump is God, MAGA is the way America does things now?
Where's the line? Ooh, that's a really hard question. Where is this line where we stop allowing this class of people to keep their boots on our throat? I mean, I think the only thing I can answer to that question is I think I do think we should just simply take. I think I agree with what you just said. Take a more of a hardline approach at that point, um, and and um, and say if you're gonna continue taking away people's right to vote in red states, like even suppressing Democratic votes in Republican controlled states like Oklahoma, West Virginia, or Tennessee, or South Carolina, or even Florida, for instance. Um, we're going to do the same to your voters until you stop, until we force you to come to the negotiating table to pursue fairer congressional maps, and also getting you to work towards a more inclusive and fairer electoral system by also engaging in some of their practices, undemocratic practices, in an effort to hold them accountable. Pushing, I know that might seem dangerous, and that really goes against my core beliefs, because I hate it when I have to go use undemocratic mechanisms to hold people accountable. But sometimes that needs to happen sometimes, um, to hold a class of people accountable who have been known to abuse the system. I think that is, I do think that's definitely fine in some degree. We have to remain vigilant, and we have to remain complacent, in my opinion. We can't be complacent. We have to always continue to safeguard democracy by if someone's playing by a whole set of different rules and not playing by the same rules that we're playing by, we have to get on the same page as them and rebalance the skills and play by the same rules as them. Sometimes you got to fight dirty to build to safeguard democracy sometimes, and I hate to say that because
Very good point.
because the people ultimately lose if both sides are participating in undemocratic mechanisms.
Exactly right. I mean, Lasty points out that we are definitely in that moment at this point in time, right? And we're definitely sort of at a point where the GOP have done these things. I mean, we sort of said earlier, right? So yeah, the actions that we need to take, as well as sort of pragmatic in the moment decisions to try and counteract GOP stuff, it has to go sort of far and beyond, trying to actively move society back to the left and back to a place that isn't as right wing. And as I've been saying, sort of all stream, it needs to be like a much broader approach than just acting in a moment. We've got to sort of think, what can we do preemptively to stop fascism? And it's a social, it's political, it's cultural, it's education, it's many different angles. But what it ultimately is a challenge to that, a challenge to inequality and injustice, and that comes from the left. Ash asks, do you hate it more than fascism? I think this was in response to what you said a second ago about you not liking the idea that you have to compromise certain values. Gerrymandering, I think, was the case here. But I suppose if I was going to read between the lines, sort of almost like the idea that you're you're centrist and you want to sort of meet people roughly in the middle and stuff. Like, do you think that it is something you can tolerate? So do you hate the idea of going against what you maybe believe in more than you do the idea of fascism? I think is what Ash is asking here.
I definitely hate it more than actually holding people who have been known to engage in undemocratic means to gain power. I do hate also trying to rig the rules in my favor to hold them accountable, simply because, like, even though there's like extreme ideologies on both sides, on both the right and the left, most notably the right, for instance, I also recognize that those people are also human beings too, and I believe they also deserve to be heard because they're also citizens like we are in society, and they also deserve to be heard as well because they're people like all of us that simply that want a chance to actually live their they also want a chance to live their lives the way the way they see fit. Um,
But is the point not that we heard what they said, which was for fascism, and that the reason they're now not being allowed to just run for office and such is because with their freedoms they tried to curtail others, right? Like we because we could very easily, we would say to them, well, as you just said, every human should be heard, but you've tried to pass a bill which, for instance, bans trans people's access to healthcare. You've tried to pass a bill which has stopped black people from being able to easily acquire IDs. But what was also increased the difficulties of which people can obtain the ID they need to vote, which has then been made more strict by the state that is monitoring the election, right? Like things which obviously go against people's human rights, which they have said is the reason they would then lose the vote, and why, whilst, yeah, of course, you want to hear people out, we need to then be able to say, okay, we've heard you. We heard you in 1933, in 1945, and all the horrors of the past and such. We now know that if you're a fascist, we don't need to hear any more from you, and you can come back. Well, I mean, I say you can come back. You won't be coming back if you're a fascist, because obviously, there's that. But like if if you're some guy who, because there's a difference, I suppose, between like the GOP higher ups and such versus like some guy who voted Trump once. But the person who voted for Trump still took a decision of their own volition to vote for a fascist, and still has been engaging in many of the problematic things that is part of the problem we're in today. So even that person needs to be able to say, yeah, I made mistakes. I need to come and learn and engage in the processes that are going to make me a safe person to be around, because a lot of this stuff, a lot of the reason we're so against fascism is because it's actively dangerous for marginalized people. We've got to say, okay, there needs to be something more. There needs to be an actual line that people can't cross before, if we're going to have a society that functions for everyone. And so that is why there's that scrutiny.
I think the words that they say I think that's fine, but if they're actually doing the things that they're doing, like actually committing those types of crimes that undermine democracy, I do think that is where the line has to be drawn. If you actually if you engage willfully enact policies that do it, which I and they're actually in which they're actually doing it. We know they're actually doing, like, such as like, as you said, like banning, was it like transgender guys from transgenders in bathrooms,
putting arbitrary limits and blocks on trans healthcare and stuff. Like if you're like access to the hormone HRT and such, and the at being able to see a medical professional if you're for transgender related matters and such.
And I do think, yeah, I think that we should hold them to account at that point and say, we're not going to put up with your, I don't want to hear you out anymore because you have been willfully trying to take away other people's rights. And maybe and this is me, maybe I am living a little bit in my head about listening to other people's viewpoints, and maybe I do need to open my eyes that there are people out there trying to undermine democracy.
I think that's the point, though. That's the point, though, isn't it? Because the person, like, the words they've said have been the precursor to what they're doing, and is part of violence as well, right? Like, because, like you said a second ago, if in 2016 Trump is saying all these obvious overtures to like being a dictator, and saying that he quite likes the idea of just being in charge forever, and all the sort of hints that he's going to run for a third term, and all the obvious plays for power. That is part of the danger. When Trump is saying things like, "Oh, Mexico's sending over rapists and criminals and such," that is a precursor to then him doing the act of fascism, which is the expansion of ICE, the mass violence against immigrants, the unchecked power they've got now. The anti-LGBTQ stuff he was saying, and Republicans have been saying, has led to this moment now where they're actively trying to derail all the progress that's been made and go beyond that by basically criminalizing LGBTQ relationships and activity, right? Like all of this stuff comes from somewhere. It's not as though like it's a crack in the earth opens up and then Trump and his friends popped out and like, right now we're going to just pass all these laws. Like it's a movement, fascism. It comes from the culture of society, and so said culture also needs to be challenged, and some people's views need to be basically identified as, okay, these views aren't okay to have anymore. If you hold this view, you're not going to be part of the normative functions of society, which means, yeah, maybe you're not going to be able to stand for ballot. Maybe you're not going to be able to have that social media account. Maybe it's time you're going to face some social exclusion, because ultimately, like the guy that comes into the room and says, yeah, I don't believe that trans people are a thing, that person's an active threat to every other LGBTQ person in that space. The person who says, well, slavery wasn't that bad, is a threat to every black person in that space. Like these are, even when they aren't physically breaking the law or doing an act of violence, still threats to democracy and still containing that act of violence because of the things they say and because of the threat that is to everyone else who is marginalized in that space.
And I do see a lot of that. Like one thing that really kind of scared me, especially with Trump, is when he authorized a military strike on Venezuela to capture the Venezuela president, and now he's been floating the possibility of using military action against Greenland to take over the Danish territory, which will like undermine the NATO alliance in the world. And I think, and I do see that is that is definitely a real danger that can undermine the United States' like longtime allies in the world.
Absolutely. But I mean, again, I think the other thing because like it's more than just like bad for sort of America's standing. If you lived in Caracas when those strikes were happening and you were in the vicinity of the bombs that got fired at them, missiles that got fired at them, and you die, then there's no, like, all the justice in the world for Trump now won't bring back the lives that got taken when he did his airstrikes, or the ships that are being like blown up in the Caribbean Sea, right? Like you can't bring back the people on those ships now because they're dead. Like, so that is also why we're so keen to move away from this sort of we're gonna deal with them once they've done something. Like, it's got to be preemptive to stop the bad stuff from happening, and so to stop us being in a situation in another 40 years time or whatever, when there's a bit even bigger death toll and such. And I think I don't Ash asks where you get your news from. I feel like that's
usually I watch. Sometimes I watch Fox News. I watch Fox Business. I also watch MSNBC, CNN sometimes. But I do try to read. I try to look at multiple viewpoints and actually understand where other people are coming from. Pretty much, I try to look at other people's viewpoints because I believe there's truth to what both sides are saying. Because, as I said earlier, I don't just watch the mainstream news. I try to look at local news. I also try to read up on what are the current laws and even the current constitution. And I try to read other articles and also books as well.
Well, I mean, as we said earlier, Fox News, I'm not sure, like, Fox News it puts news in their title, but it's like Fox Entertainment in the affect of news, in that it's people dressed up to look professional and stuff, then just shouting about conservative worldview. It's like in the UK, we have GB News, which is basically the same thing, but they in the UK, you legally have to have two different viewpoints represented, otherwise you're not allowed to call yourself a news channel. In America, you don't have that law, so Fox can get away with just putting on anything they like, which is Republican affiliated, and passing it off as informative, and then obviously putting their stuff out to their demographics who are likely to vote Republican to sort things out, which is not good. I mean, as Ash says, Fox and MSNBC are not both sides. But Raptor has a question. Raptor Runner Blue, Raptor, of course, lovely person. Raptor says, "What is the line? What is the line until you, dear guest, realize that being a centrist helps right wingers undermine democracy?" And this is one which I think is quite important, right? Because the whole sort of premise of what I've been saying really is that you've said many things which are correct in this stream, many things which I would agree with, but you keep coming back to this. So we've got to, there's both sides. There are good points, and even though they have these views, even though until they do these things, we can still reach out and search. But what I'm saying is almost, for one, you can still see the best in people, but not be in the center, and then have people who are on the right and the far right and such, and specifically the GOP and parties like that who continually undermine this good faith that they're being given. You can force them to either come and improve, or be left in the bin and such. I think you had to step away just for a second there. So yeah, I'll just say on GB News actually. For a
Sorry, I was interrupted. My mom came into my room.
Don't worry, don't worry about it. No, not at all, not at all. Yeah, I was just saying like I was just saying then, like you've said many, to sum up, you've said many things I quite agree with, but you keep coming back to this sort of centrist tenet of there's bits of both sides we can take, there's good ideas everywhere, and we've got to sort of try and communicate and such. And whilst I agree,
Raptor and then I don't know how to pronounce this other guy's name,
Unfortuitous Ash.
You have definitely opened my mind up to the fact that if people are continually undermining democracy, and I know they are, I definitely saw in the news, like when Trump deported Kilmar Abrego Garcia to El Salvador after a court ruling said he could not be I think it was definitely the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 that the White House had to facilitate Kilmar Abrego's return back into the United States, and the United States undermined his was ignoring that court ruling. There's definitely some truth to like right wingers undermining democracy, and maybe I am completely wrong on the fact that we can't always work together, work with other people, because if there are people out there, bad actors who are continually undermining democracy, we can no longer work with those people anymore. You have to play hardball with them. You have to get on this. You have to play by the same dirty rules, even though that might hurt ordinary people. But you have to sometimes you have to take a hardline approach to a certain degree to hold bad actors accountable and make them face justice for their crimes.
Wise words. No? I would say just quickly, Robin, on the point a second ago, she has pointed out firstly that Fox had to pay $787 million for their lies about the January 6th stuff, I believe. Has their disclaimer stating about entertainment purposes, and crucially, she recommends an independent news source site, and there's I can't remember the exact one that I used most recently, but there's sites which basically report on the accuracy, reliability, sort of the type of sources said newspaper or news outlet uses to try and basically show you which news sites are more likely to give you a better depiction of what's happening. Like, for instance, I use The Guardian quite a bit, but as well as The Guardian, I try and use other sites as well to sort of get an array of because The Guardian, they're better quality than some of the other ones. They do generally report better, like more accurately on stuff that happens, but they also have their problems with stuff. They have a lot of writers who cover trans issues quite poorly, for instance, and they've got plenty of writers who I would say are quite to the right of where maybe I would like. But the point is, they generally report better than, say, like Fox News or something. Anyway, that's very good. Last question then, unless there are any more. And so you're really, really last call, because as much as I have been really enjoying this, but I've noticed our 1 hour and 30 minutes finish line has been run a little bit past, which is fine. It's not an issue. But Raptor also says, can the guest name a good right-wing policy?
I think the one thing I do agree with Republicans on, I do think, I do agree that citizens should be only allowed to vote in our democracy, but I think there should be like a clear definition of what defines a citizen. Someone who's definitely a taxpayer, someone who's a legal permanent resident, someone like who has a green card should definitely be allowed to vote, and also paying taxes, because that's what our founding fathers fought for during the American Revolution. That was one of our biggest complaints against the British during the Revolutionary War. We were unhappy. We were definitely unhappy with taxation without representation. But to answer your question, a good right-wing policy that I really agree with most conservatives and right-wingers on is, I believe that only citizens should be allowed to vote.
Okay, I mean, I feel like Robin has summed up my thoughts. I feel like that's just like a universal thing. I don't think that's specifically. I mean, they like to claim that Democrats, like the lie that the idea that Democrats are importing millions of illegal voters or whatever, like is one of their sort of favorite talking points. But it's not like the case, is it? It's just that they like to try and claim that there's all these. Yeah, it's part of their wider scare campaign against immigrants, right? But
and I do agree to some extent with like voter ID laws, but I think it should be very easy to acquire an ID, so it's not.
Oh yeah, exactly, right. It should be free to, like, if you want people to produce a card to say, yeah, I'm Joe Smith, I want to vote, that paper should be provided by the government for free and be something which is as easy to get as, I don't know, anything else in society. And that's also part of the wider like processes of improving democracy, if you were going to have something like that. And on the point about citizens, like many citizens are not able to vote because they are seen as felons. Not seen as felons, they are convicted of a crime and now can't vote, or don't have their ID and such. But also, the immigrants who are maybe not citizens are still part of the American society, often still paying taxes and contributing to the American economy. So arguably, the sort of barrier that stops them from voting is an arbitrary one, because they're still going to be in the society and should have their say as part of that democracy. Like if the guy that is doing a job that helps make America work, and that job, by the way, isn't just for paid stuff. Just being in the society means you're part of the society, and they should have a say in how it's run. Like all of that should count you as part of that society and let you be able to vote. So what was really, and I mean, again, my sort of more left-wing nations are silly, everyone should be able to be part of a world community and such. We're leaving just for a second, just for the purposes of time, I'll stress. But people, there shouldn't be this this fuss as much over who's like the numbers of voter fraud are incredibly low, and ironically actually are more likely to be Republicans trying to cheat the system. Like
I do agree with that.
Exactly, yeah. Right? Like it's very ironic that all of Trump's like the illegal voters, like it was Trump that tried to illegally overthrow the election and tried to get the governors, as he said earlier, to invent votes for him to win in the swing states. So it's very much the case. Right. I think there was one more a question which is not political. It's a nice one. This one for you. The last good film that you saw. From some random geek. Hello, by the way.
Let me think. I'm definitely the last good movie I saw. I'm actually a big time Star Wars fan. I'm actually going with Rogue One right now. That's my favorite. Rogue One. Yeah.
Is that the one where they have to get the plans to the Death Star? Is that the one where they're trying to?
Yep.
Very good. I remember enjoying that one. Been a while, as you can tell, bro. My memory for Star Wars is a bit of a sieve, really. I sort of they've made so many spin-offs that I've lost track a little bit of what's quite happening in the Star Wars universe. But the last good film I saw, I watched A Few Good Men recently with Jack Nicholson, Tom Cruise, and Demi Moore.
That is a good movie. Also, I like that movie as well.
Courtroom drama. It's got some good actors too. Kiefer Sutherland's in it. Kevin Bacon's in it. Very good cast.
You can't handle the truth.
Exactly. That's the line. Anyway, that'll conclude this one. Thank you for coming on. It was we didn't agree on everything, but it was a very pleasant conversation. I must say, some of the conversations I have on here aren't quite as always as nice. But hopefully, we thought a little bit about the way politics is, and hopefully, it just even you don't have to stop being a centrist, but even if you just think, maybe the centre should be a bit further to the left than what we've seen over the last few years, and that there is a better way of doing things than having to rely on the consent of far right actors in society.
And seeing people's comment section, you definitely opened my eyes to that. You definitely opened my eyes, because there are bad actors who are continually trying to abuse the system, mainly on the right, who are just trying to do it for their own political gain, and we have to, in the end, hold them accountable. And if that means a hardline approach, so be it. If we're going to safeguard our democracy.
Wise words. Right then, thanks everyone for listening. I have no idea when the next one of these will be. Maybe next weekend. My schedule is very. Clearly, I committed to the streamer life. Just random stuff showing up. It will happen when it happens. Thanks again, Young Centrist, for coming on, and this will be the end of the live show. Take care, everyone.
Have a good one, you guys.